Good evening. My name is Stephen Kadavi. I'm the president of the Iranian American Jewish Federation of New York. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but hopefully the video you just saw gives you an overview of the important work performed by IAJF since the start of the COVID pandemic, as well as for the past 19 years. The work that we do is only made possible thanks to the generosity of our donors. As everyone likely knows at this point, we made the difficult decision to cancel the 2020 IAJF Gala at Lincoln Center, which means that it's now more important than ever for our donors to stay committed to IAJF and renew, or even better, increase their pledges. There are many organizations that count on the support of IAJF to sustain their programs, and it's essential during these uncertain times that we come through for them. So please go to our website now at iajfny.org and make your contribution, or reach out to any IAJF board member with your commitment. Just a quick reminder to everyone, IAJF is a 501c3 charitable organization, and as such, does not endorse candidates for a political office or take sides in any election. However, as a service to our community, we will host elected officials and political figures solely for informational and educational purposes. On that note, we're very pleased to have with us tonight Congressman Tom Suozzi. Congressman Suozzi represents the 3rd Congressional District in New York. He's a member of the House Ways and Means Committee and serves on both the Oversight and Tax Policy subcommittees. He previously served on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and House Armed Services Committee. Prior to becoming elected to the House of Representatives, Congressman Suozzi served as mayor of his hometown, Glen Cove. He also served as Nassau County executive. With that, I'm thrilled to introduce Congressman Tom Suozzi. Congressman, it's great to have you with us tonight.
Stephen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I see that Mehran Hakimian's on the call also with about 20 other people or so. And I want to thanks for giving me this opportunity to speak with the Persian American community. Very important part of my district, a community I've had a relationship with for a very long time, going back to the days when I was mayor and county executive, and certainly now as a member of Congress. And I'm here to really assert my strong support for the state of Israel, and that I'll do everything I can to make sure that Israel remains safe and secure and continues to prosper. Recently, I just sponsored some legislation for the U.S. to cooperate with Israel on doing research and development regarding pharmaceuticals and COVID drugs especially. And I've always been, my goal has always been to be seen as being the most reliable non-Jewish Democrat on the issue of Israel. And I've traveled to Israel a couple times. I've supported the president when he moved the capital to Jerusalem. I did a resolution in support of the 50th anniversary. I sponsored legislation, bipartisan legislation called the Shields Act, having to do with the missiles on the Lebanese border, and so many other things. I can't think of any single issue where I haven't stood with Israel, especially during these difficult times when some members of my party have been negative against Israel. I've spoken out against them publicly. I wanted you to show that video tonight, but Stephen didn't think it was allowable under the not-for-profit rules. I told him at the beginning of the call that I disagree with him, even though he's a lawyer. I'm a lawyer too, but we can disagree with each other. That's okay. And I actually,
Congressman. Sorry, go ahead. No, keep going. Sorry.
So I actually did an interview on CNN where I condemned Congresswoman Omar's remarks when she came out and spoke out against Jews generally. And some very anti-Semitic tropes. And I will continue to do so, even when it's, even when, the president, I'm not voting for the president, but I supported the president when it came to issues related to Israel. I applaud the agreement with the UAE and Israel. So even though he's from a different party, when it comes to the issue of Israel, I'll stand for Israel. And when it's somebody of my party and they do something that's against Israel, I'll go against them. And so I'll do what I think is the right thing to do, because those are the values that I was taught by my family. I went to Chaminade All-Boys Catholic High School. I went to Boston College, Jesuit College, and I went to Jesuit Catholic Fordham Law School. It's a very big part of my life. I was the co-chair of the National Prayer Breakfast this year. And it's a very big part of my life, and I know how important the faith is to many of the people on this call. Their faith is to many of the people on this call. And I'm not ashamed of my faith, and I'm not ashamed of the support that I have for Israel, because We share values with Israel. We're both democracies. We're both participating in the modern economy. We both have the rule of law. We both treat individual people with respect. And that's the key to success for the long-term future of our world, is to work with our allies and encourage those who work with us and discourage those who work against us. So instead of me talking for much longer, I just want to say thank you again for having me on. I want to thank Mehran Hakimian for getting me on the call. I'm going to check and see how many participants are on the call now. Let's see if I can see that on here.
So you know our community is always late to everything, so give them a few minutes.
Okay. Okay, so but I'll take any questions you want me to answer.
Yeah, so I've got a few questions I can ask, and then audience, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So you mentioned bipartisan legislation that you passed, and I know that you're vice chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a bipartisan caucus that's composed of half Democrats and half Republicans.
25 Democrats, 25 Republicans, yes. Which
is a sight that's extremely rare in the current environment, as governing from the center seems to be. So, you know, you touched on some fringe members of your party. What do you say to those that are concerned about a shift of the Democratic Party towards that progressive wing and the perception that you've got members of the party that are anti-Israel or have made anti-Semitic comments?
Well, there certainly are members of our party who have made anti-Semitic comments and anti-Israel comments. And there are some Republicans that have as well. They're fringe members of the Republican Party as well. I don't want to say it's a shift, but I think it's a battle that's being joined right now. And I know this is not political, but you know, if you don't want to see that fringe group get a stronger toehold in the Democratic Party, you got to support guys like me, because they're coming after me as well. I had a primary this past year. I was speaking at the Dix Hills Jewish Center, and I spoke out strongly anti-BDS. And my opponent came to the Dix Hills Jewish Center, and her supporters condemned me for not supporting BDS legislation, for not supporting BDS. So it's a battle. But I'm going to, you know, Joe Biden says we have to fight for the soul of our party. You know, the fact that Joe Biden won this primary and he defeated Bernie Sanders, who certainly had less supportive things to say about Israel, and Elizabeth Warren and others, was a testament to Joe Biden's success as a politician. I think that you'll find that he'll be a very, very strong pro-Israel president if he's elected. But I know that many of the Persian Americans are Republicans, and many of them are supporting Trump, and that's fine, just as long as they support me too.
So you touched on an important point, and in speaking with members of our community, I've heard, and you've heard as well, that there are many that just view themselves as a one-issue voter, with that issue being Israel. So what do you say to those people who worry that a Biden administration may not provide the same level of unwavering support that the current administration might?
I think that Joe Biden has a long history in politics and a long history in government. And with the exception of the Iran nuclear deal, which I know everybody dislikes vehemently, I would have never voted for it. I wasn't in Congress at the time. I would not have voted for it. You know, he's got a pretty strong record on the state of Israel. And I think that was something that the president was pushing, and he is a good soldier, how to go along with it. But he's got a very strong record. You know, when it came to funding Israel, even the Obama administration with Joe Biden provided incredible funding for Israel. I think that the personal relationship between Netanyahu and Obama was very bad, and that it didn't help. And I'm not saying whose fault that was, but I think that you'll find Joe Biden to be very strong pro-Israel. But I'm not on this call to persuade anybody to vote for anybody in any race. But I'm trying to talk about my record and the fact that I've been very strong on Israel. And don't listen to my platitudes. Don't listen to what I say. Look at my voting record. Look at the letters I've signed on to. Look at the legislation I've sponsored. Look at my TV appearances. You can get it from Mehran, where I've spoken on these issues. I'm a very strong supporter of Israel. When I was the county executive in Nassau County, I went to Israel during the second Intifada, after the massacre in Hebron, and we stayed at the King David Hotel, and it was empty. The only people in Jerusalem at the time that were tourists were my delegation, which were some New York politicians. And everywhere we went, we had armed guards, and we were in buses with chicken wire and on the windows so that the glass broke. And we went to the Hadassah Hospital and saw the skin banks, there were a lot of bombings at the time. And we went to Albert Einstein, and we met with the U.S. ambassador, and we met with, I guess it was Sharon's press guy at the time. I met with Shimon Peres. He explained the two-state solution to me. It was brilliant the way he explained it. Visited one of the first settlements ever, Gush Etzion. The whole trip was very political, very governmental. It was a very relatively quick trip. And then all of a sudden we were walking at the Western Wall, which is where Jesus walked. And for me, I was like, wow, I hadn't even thought about that factor until that point. It was kind of a last minute trip, and it was all very busy and planned and scheduled. And I was like, wow, this is, I can't believe I'm here. And then I went over to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I said, I have to go to mass. I have to go to church. I have to go to a mass at this church. So I found out there was a mass the next morning. And I told the guides, I said, I have to go to church. If I'm in Jerusalem and I don't go to church and I go home, my mother's going to be so mad at me. I said, I have to go to church. So they said, no, we can't do it. We don't have the security guards. We don't have the people to can take you. It's not on the calendar. You can't do it. So that night I decided I was going to go. I got up early the next morning. I got another member of the assembly to come with me. I was the county executive at the time. And I snuck out of the hotel, and I snuck across I don't know what the area was that we went across, and we walked down to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I went to mass. And I was so proud of myself that first it was a very uplifting spiritual moment, but it was also, I was like, look at me, I'm so courageous. I just, went out without my armed guards, and I snuck across the field, and I came just so I could go to church. And then I walked outside, and there were all the little girls getting on the bus to go to school that morning. And I was like, I'm not the courageous one. It's the people in Israel, it's the people in Jerusalem that have been living this way at the time for 60 years with every one of their neighbors trying to kill them. And still they've held on to their faith. They've held on to the rule of law. They've held on to democracy. They've held on to capitalism. At the time they were making the desert bloom. They're just starting to talk about computer software and think about everything that's happened since then. So I'd always would say, I'm a supporter of Israel, but I didn't really know the issue that well as a former mayor and county executive. I knew the issue somewhat from reading the paper and talking to people, but now it was like, it hit me in the head that from that moment on, I would always be a strong supporter of Israel. And I have been, and I will continue to be.
No, it's a great story, Congressman, and nothing can replicate an actual trip to the Holy Land. I mean, you can read about it, you can see it, but until you're there and you feel it, there's nothing like it. So
go up to the Golan Heights and see what's happening across the border right there, and you really get a sense of what's going on.
So I don't think there's any question about your credentials and your support of Israel. In addition to the legislation that you've mentioned, I know that you've passed legislation that targets Hezbollah and its terrorist activities. Can you comment a little bit on the Israel-UAE agreement and kind of what it may lead to?
I think that we're going to see other Arab countries come along because they recognize, I have always thought that the answer to the Middle East problems have always been economic. That the solution will come from economic. My pet idea, I'm not in a position to make it happen, make it real yet, but maybe if I'd stayed on foreign affairs, but when I last went to Israel, we went to Ramallah as well. And I was shocked at how much economic activity there was in Ramallah, despite the fact that the security fence. But there was a lot of industry there, unlike many of the other areas that we saw. They were covered in garbage and hovels for housing, and really a lot of economic degradation. But in Ramallah, it was much more upscale, I thought. And I at the time, I thought to myself, if only we could get more this is why BDS is so stupid. If only we could get more investment in these communities and people's lives could be improved, they wouldn't feel like they have nothing to lose. They'd have a life, they'd have an income, they'd have education, they'd have healthcare, they'd have sewers, they'd have garbage. Then they would feel a much stronger desire for peace because they wouldn't want to lose their lifestyles. Right now, what do we have to lose? And so my pet idea has always been that we should get Israel, the United States, any other friends we can get from other democracies throughout the world, whether it's Europe or India or South Korea or Japan or Australia, get other countries throughout the world that support these ideas and create an insurance fund so that if you want to invest in this area, and the only reason people don't invest is they're afraid that their business is going to get blown up or it's going to get nationalized. So if that were to happen to your business, this insurance fund would recoup your investment. And that way we could create a fund to encourage economic investment, because if more people were working, if more revenue is being generated for their government, which is not much of a government right now, but more revenue is being generated for their government, and if they could build a better infrastructure, have a better quality of life, they'd focus less on building tunnels and on hiding missiles in mosques and in schools and in houses, and they'd focus more on building sewers and on teaching their kids, not the garbage that's sometimes taught now, but teaching people and taking care of healthcare and issues like that. Then it would be a lot easier to get people to be reasonable, I think.
It's not an
And that's why the UAE is so important. The deal with the UAE is so important, because that economic language, that economic conversation back and forth will make a big difference in encouraging other countries to do the same. I don't think Saudi Arabia is far behind. They can't go first. They're going to have to go last. But I think it's only a matter of time.
That's great. I hope you're right, because I haven't heard that idea of the insurance fund before, but that's
my idea.
It's very clever. And you're right. I mean, the impediment to investing in those areas is fear of loss and terrorism. So
I mean, could you imagine if you could get the U.S. to put up $1 billion and somebody else, someone from Europe to put up $1 billion, another billion from Japan, another billion from Australia? I mean, you could really be a lot of investment.
So let's shift gears a little bit. I'm just curious, what's it like in the life of Tom Suozzi legislating during this pandemic? I mean, what's your day-to-day like? Are you in D.C., New York?
Right now I'm in New York. Go back on the 14th. I wish we were going back sooner to make a deal. The Problem Solvers has actually come up with a compromise that we haven't gone public with yet, but a compromise between what the House proposed and what the president proposed to find a happy medium between the two. We have to understand, for those of us that live in New York, I think most of the people on this call are from New York, right?
Yes.
We are going to be devastated because our state has lost so much money from sales taxes going down. And we have lost so much money at the county level from sales tax going down. And if the state doesn't get the money for its lost sales taxes, they won't be able to give the money to the schools. And then the schools will be hit. And it goes on and on and on with all the different devastating things that will happen. Doctors will be hit because their Medicaid reimbursement is going to go down, and nursing homes will be hit, and cops will be. Talk about the Democrats say they want to defund the cops, which I don't want to defund the cops. I did a press conference honoring local cops the other day. Mitch McConnell's defunding the cops right now because he's not giving money back to the states and the counties and the towns and villages. So that's a huge issue for us in New York, as is the issue of the state and local tax deduction. Yeah. We got, crushed when they took away our state and local tax deduction. Well, my district, more people use the state and local tax deduction in my district than just about any district in the United States of America because our property taxes are so high. And so we need that state and local tax deduction. And I'm the lead on the legislation. I got legislation passed in December by the House Democrats and Peter King, one Republican out of all the Republicans. And then the HEROES Act, which is what the Democrats passed as the relief package back in May that we can't get Senator McConnell to even negotiate on. I got the restoration of SALT put into that bill. And so that's, I'm shocked that I got it that far. I don't know that we'll ever get it from McConnell because he doesn't want to do anything to help New York, even though New York in the past 5 years has sent $120 billion more to the federal government in income taxes than we get back in federal aid for federal programs or projects. Mitch McConnell's state of Kentucky, on the other hand, in the same 5-year period, has received $150 billion more than they've paid in. So it's the height of hypocrisy when he talks about a blue state bailout, because we're bailing out his state every year. And we'll do it, that's fine. We're New Yorkers. We know we've got more wealth than the other places do. But if we could only get our own money back into our state, we could address our high tax problem. We could address our infrastructure issues. We could address some of our quality of life issues. I mean, Long Island, anybody who's on this call from Long Island, New York, it's one of the greatest places in the world to live, except for the property taxes. So that SALT issue is very important to us.
I assume nothing will happen before the election in terms of repeal of the SALT tax.
I hope it will. I mean, I'm still fighting for it. People say that I'm Pollyannish about that, but I mean, Schumer has said he's going to help us with it, and Pelosi says she's going to keep it on the negotiating table. It's just a question of whether McConnell's going to negotiate or not. And right now he's refusing to even negotiate on the basic stuff, state and local aid. I mean, that's basic. That's going to affect every Republican and every Democratic governor in the country, every Republican, every Democratic mayor in the country, every Republican, every Democratic county executive in the country. They're all clamoring for this. So every school district in the country. One of the biggest things that the state of New York or any state spends money on is school aid. So if the state doesn't get the money, it doesn't give the money to the schools. If the schools don't get the money, the schools either cut or they raise property taxes. And there's no way anybody's going to let you raise property taxes in this environment. So we're facing some very difficult times ahead. And people say, why don't you just cut it? Why don't you just cut? Well, I've been in politics for 25 years. I cut the workforce in Nassau County by 1,000 people. Mm-hmm. I didn't raise taxes for 6 years in a row, 7 years in a row, 6 years in a row. And it's not an easy thing to do. I fought with the unions. I cut the size of the workforce. I made things more efficient. I put in computers and looked for efficiencies. It's very hard because there's so many mandates that come from the federal government and from the state of New York. And
so you think when you go back on the 14th, the problem solvers will be able to bridge the gap between McConnell?
Well, I'm hoping before the 14th we'll come out with our proposal publicly. And I'm hoping that'll encourage people to come back sooner. But, that's wishful thinking, because I thought we were going to get a deal done back in June, and then I thought we were going to get a deal done in July. I can't believe that McConnell or Trump think it makes sense for them to not do a deal. I don't see how that helps them politically. I can't appeal to their compassion or to their reason, but politically, I think it's nonsensical that they're not supporting an effort to help the states and provide for testing and provide for more for the small businesses through additional PPP loans, for the EIDL program, for just so many, for the stimulus checks, so many different things.
And there's only so much you can do, Congressman, I guess, from where you're at.
Well, the one thing I'm doing is trying to work across party lines, and that's, the only way we're going to get anything done.
Are you worried about a flight from New York? I mean,
yes.
Even before COVID, right, because of the SALT tax repeal, you've had some billionaires that have left New York, and obviously that just exacerbates the situation. And then COVID also, well, although we have very rare number of cases right now, but in general, and people were fleeing New York City and New York prior to when COVID first hit.
Well, we all got a big problem in New York State. New York City has an especially bad problem, and I represent a piece of Queens. Because of COVID, because of, I think, the mismanagement of de Blasio, but also because of the fact that a lot of people went out to the Hamptons, or went up to Connecticut, or went to upstate New York because of COVID, where they thought it was safer to live in their suburban mansion, so their second home. And they're like, hey, if I don't live in New York City for 6 months, I don't have to pay New York City taxes. So they're not going back, not until the 6 months is up. And they're going to save a lot of money. And New York City is going to lose a lot of money.
And that 6 month mark is in about a week or so. I mean, if you think back to when everything shut down. So, yeah.
And other people stayed in Florida. Other people were down in Florida for the winter break. They didn't come back.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the upcoming election. more from a logistical standpoint, no one knows what COVID will be like in November, but what do you think the actual act of voting is going to look like? Are we going to have to put ourselves at risk in order to vote?
Well, I'm talking to some of my colleagues about this because I'm very concerned. We've been pushing, the Democrats have been pushing to vote by mail. Vote by mail, it's safer. More people will vote. It's more convenient. Vote by mail, vote by mail, vote by mail. And you have to, in New York State, you have to apply for your absentee ballot. You don't just get a ballot outright. You have to apply for it, then it gets sent to you, and then you fill it out, et cetera, et cetera. The problem that I'm concerned about is that many more Democrats will vote by mail and many more Republicans will vote in person. And then on election day, it'll look like Trump had this big victory because the votes that were at the polling booth will show a lot more Trump votes than Democratic votes, than Biden votes. Well, as it goes on, it'll get closer and closer and closer. And unlike the people on this call, I'm hoping Biden will win. But if that happens, the president will use that 2-week period, 3-week period to say, oh, it's rigged, it's fixed, it's, which is just, there's no basis in fact for that. So, I don't want America to become like some third world country where we send in election observers. We've always had the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America based upon the results at the polling booth. And, there's never been any incidents of fraud at the elections, especially at the national level. And so I don't know why the president continues to promote that narrative, but it's very dangerous. And I think we have to really be, so I'm going to encourage people to vote early. You're permitted to vote early. Very few people actually do it. But if you vote early, there won't be as many people at the polling booth because it's spread over a period of time. So you don't have to worry about coming in contact with other people, or vote in person if you can on election day. But if you have to, vote by mail to be safe.
So vote early. You're saying, so polls are actually open prior to November 3rd, and you can go into a voting
But
booth.
it's not all the polling places. There's only a limited number of locations. There'll probably be one in the town of North Hempstead. Probably, I don't know if it'll be in Roslyn or in Great Neck, but there'll be one over there.
Okay, good to know. Something people should look into because
you should find out where that is and let your membership know what the location will be.
Yeah, no, we definitely will. Because I think the last thing any of us want to see is a repeat of 2000 when
that was awful.
We're up for a few weeks. So I was actually on my honeymoon in November of 2000. We were in the Seychelles, and I had voted by absentee actually. And then
Fraud.
This is 20 years ago where internet was sparse and we didn't have cell phone coverage the way we did. So it's like November 9th or 10th and we had no idea who won. And then we were in a taxi in the Seychelles and I asked the taxi driver, so who won the election in the US? And he said, oh, they don't know. There's fraud going on. There's lawsuits. And I looked at my wife and I said, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It's the United States of America.
Well, I forgot to say to everybody when they got on the call, I should have said, Choshumadi. Choshumadi. I forgot to say that. Or Bruchim Abayim.
What, Congressman, what about foreign influence on the election?
It's real. It's very real. We have to be very concerned. This is something I brought up about anti-Semitism also, as well as what's going on with the Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter stuff, all the civil unrest that we see. Forget about, where you fall on these different issues for now. Forget about Democrat, Republican, Trump, Biden. Forget about all that. We have to all be concerned as Americans, all of us, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, everybody has to be concerned about foreign influence in our country trying to sow civil unrest. We know that the internet is used by people who want to do great things, the makers, as well as people who want to do awful things, the takers. We know that already, that people misuse the internet, the white nationalist groups, the far left groups, the people promoting violence, the people promoting misinformation. We know that that's happening. But what people don't recognize, and it's very true, is that the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians are using social media to sow different disinformation and to sow civil unrest in the United States of America. It is a proven fact. This is not partisan. This is not Democrats versus Republicans. It's a proven fact that in the 2016 election, the Russians would create fake internet sites and fake accounts and what they call memes, and they'd show us, if you care about Black lives, vote for Hillary. If you care about blue lives, vote for Trump. If you love Jesus, vote for Trump. If you hate Jesus, vote for Hillary. You know, and they actually did these graphics that they bought advertising on the internet, and it was all just to take the worst basic instincts of people, which exist, I mean, among fringe people, and try to promote them and make it so that they're much more prevalent. You know, the far left of America is about 8% of the voters. The far right of America is about 6% of the voters. Then there's two bigger groups, you know, 20 some odd percent, that are like regular liberals and regular conservatives. But then the biggest group in the middle, 52%, three different groups, are the politically disengaged and the politically disenchanted. The people that are just sick and tired of it all. They're sick of hearing all the fighting. They're sick and tired of everybody, you know, can't get a deal done. They're sick and tired of the, oh, you can have it. It all stinks. It's all no good. So that's the destruction of our democracy. So we've got to figure out how to get the people back involved again, which I think they will this election. I think this will be one of the highest turnouts we've ever seen in any election. But it's important that everybody has all the information. You can't say the Republicans like they're all the same, and you can't say the Democrats like they're all the same. You know, not all the Democrats are the same on Israel. Not all the Republicans are the same on Israel. So you have to try and be educated about all the different candidates that are out there. So that's why I'm happy to be on this call to try and talk to some of your folks.
No,
so Tasha Kur.
You've got little pieces here and there, Congressman. I like it. We can give you lessons at some point if you want, and you become fluent honorary member.
I'm ready to go.
Let me just a couple more questions. Let me just shift gears here. So, in our backyard, you're co-chair of the Long Island Sound Caucus, which is a body of water that's extremely important in our area. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing to protect it?
Well, I've been involved with the Long Island Sound and water quality since my day before I was mayor of Glen Cove, even. And I was once named the Environmentalist of the Year for all of New York State by the New York League of Conservation Voters. And since I've been in Congress, I'm the co-chair of a bipartisan group called the Long Island Sound Caucus. I've increased funding for the Long Island Sound by 500% since I've been in office. And every year I get it increased, and I'm going to get it increased again this year. And why do I do that? Because I want to try and improve the water quality. I think the Long Island Sound is our national park, and it's a beautiful natural asset. And the more the water quality improves, the more the fish come back, the more people feel comfortable swimming and boating in that water, the better it is for our quality of life and for our home values. And for, you know, a lot of the problems we have with our water quality in the Long Island Sound comes from the New York City sewer system and from the Connecticut River. Because they all have nitrogen that come out into the sound, and the nitrogen is what makes things grow. When you put fertilizer on your lawn, it makes things grow. When you put horse manure on your tomato plants, it makes it grow. You know, nitrogen makes things grow. Well, the runoff from fertilizer or the effluent from sewage treatment plants has nitrogen. It makes the microscopic organisms grow in the Long Island Sound. That's what makes it brown. And then when those microscopic organisms die, they sink to the bottom. And as they decompose, they eat up the oxygen. That's called hypoxia. There's not enough oxygen left. And that's what kills the fish and kills the lobsters and kills the sea life. So I've been working for 20 years to try and reduce the nitrogen into the Long Island Sound. I was the first sewage treatment plant on all of the Long Island Sound when I was mayor of Glen Cove to cut the nitrogen effluent by 50%. Now just about every sewage treatment plant has cut their nitrogen effluent by 50%. But there's more we need to keep on doing.
Well, we're grateful for your efforts, Congressman, because Long Island Sound is really the crown jewel of our area, and whatever we need to do to protect it, I think you're right.
And now we need to be concerned about, you know, sea level rising and the effect that that will have on some of our properties. And it's going to go up. The sea levels are going to go up, so we have to be thinking about what we can do about resiliency and protecting our properties that are on the water's edge.
Well, but you probably, I mean, you've got to go after the root of the problem, which is climate change.
Absolutely, 100%. Should follow what Israel's doing and do more wind power and solar power.
Yeah, I think we'd like to, but it's always not in my backyard, right? I mean, that's what you hear when it comes to wind in particular and turbines. Nobody wants to see them, but everyone wants them.
One of the big keys to success is transmission lines and batteries. so that when the windmills are not going or the sun's not shining, you can store the power, and that you can get it from places that are remote places and transmit it to some place closer to where you are. So as the technology improves on battery storage and on transmission, you'll see more and more of wind and solar.
Great. So last question, Congressman, more of a catch-all, but what's your focus going forward? I mean, what do you hope to achieve in the next couple of years?
Well, my number one focus is getting money for New York State. That's my number one focus, is bringing money back to the district, bringing money back to New York. We have to get our fair share. A pet idea of mine is, from 1972 to 1986, from Richard Nixon, and then ultimately Ronald Reagan get rid of it, was a thing called revenue sharing, which is that you got whatever revenues you sent to the federal government in your income taxes, you get a certain percentage of it back to your state. We need to get more of our own money back to New York State, so we can use that money to reduce our state taxes and reduce our property taxes. And if we could get our own money back, we'd have a lot lighter burden here in New York State. We set up this program in America in the 40s and the 60s, where we've subsidized our poor brothers and sisters in Alabama and Mississippi and ultimately North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Arizona. We helped them because they were so backwards. They needed our help because they were so behind with education and civil rights and environment. And we're going to help them because they're so behind. Well, now we're subsidizing these states and they're kicking our butts. People are moving out of our state and they're moving to South Carolina, North Carolina, and Florida and Arizona. They're taking our money and they're building new roads and new bridges and new sewers and new hospitals and new schools, and they're expanding like crazy, and their sales tax revenues are going up, and their income tax revenues are going up, and their income tax revenues are going up, and they're doing great. And they're saying, oh, your taxes are so high up in New York, but we're paying for them. So we got to change. It's got to be a whole philosophical change as to how to fund the federal government and how much of the money that goes to the federal government comes back to the states.
A worthy cause, Congressman, and we wish you luck because it affects all of us, not just our bottom lines, but like you said, property values and really the future of this area. So.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. Toda rabah.
Thank you. Good office, Congressman.
Thank you. Tashakur. Merci. Thank you.